Most of my works are essentially about horrors of late digital capitalism and about the fact that today the entire society became one gigantic factory of data production and exploitation, and we all became workers, many of us without even being aware of it. The focus of my work since 10 years has been collective intelligence, which is the phenomenon based on interactions of multitude, thousands or millions of various elements, molecules, animals, humans. Actually, everything in the world is a product of collective intelligence. It's not a product of one single individual. And the whole concept of individualism that was so important for modernity is actually a blind alley. It's a paradigm that has brought us to a lot of terrible phenomena in culture, such as the climate change, societal collapse, radical inequality. In reality, we have never been individual. We form societies. Everything in these societies is a product of a collective, so our languages, our writing systems, our tools, and the currencies. We cannot name any single author who invented them. They were created over centuries, over generations of people. For example, the Bible or the mythologies, they don't have any single identified author. And these myths were created over generations by thousands of anonymous people. So when we think about this today with internet culture, where there are a lot of phenomena, internet memes, for example, circulating, in many ways, they are coming back to these beginnings of human societies where everything was created collectively. I started thinking that maybe in the future artworks will also start to resemble the digital objects, and they will start evolving, and they will not be static forms hanging in a museum, but they will be also reacting to changes in the world. So I may really create conditions or parameters of a system for forms to emerge. Sometimes it's about bringing some chemicals together. Sometimes it's about bringing microbes or groups of animals together. And sometimes it's about looking at collectives of humans, whether workers, of members of social movements, and looking at what kind of unpredictable forms will emerge from it. A.A.I, which stands for Artificial Intelligence, is a series of works that I have started in 2014, and these works were outsourced by me or crowdsourced to another species, to termite colonies. I started working with entomologists who work in Namibia, but they also have outposts in Florida. Termites are almost blind. They can be supplied with alternative building materials, and they obviously built these very beautiful architectural forms that have evolved over millions of years into being like perfect engineered structures that architects are looking at to study, like perfectly ventilated forms where circulation of air is really optimized in incredible ways. And so I was fascinated by the fact that termites could actually be given some other material to build with, and they will still build this monumental pyramids or cathedral-like structures. The entomologists that I work with, they actually were hired a number of times by mining corporations in Africa to check whether there is something important in the soil and whether this is a good place to set up a new mine. Because termites go down 50 meters underground, and they bring up whatever is there. They bring molecules of gold or coltan or tungsten or copper, and so actually it's really perverse on the part of these corporations because they found something that is even cheaper than slave labor: termites. And so I looked at societies of termites that built these forms collectively, like a cathedral or like a pyramid, but there is no guiding hand. There is no hierarchical structure. It's an emergent process, and 5 or 10 termites are not going to build a form. It emerges out of millions of specimen, out of millions of termites, this form emerges. I thought that it's so fascinating, and this could be a good model to apply to art production and to outsource my works to a termite colony and to have a society of couple million organisms build my sculptures. And so together with the entomologist that I work with, we isolate a colony of termites, so a couple million organisms. We give them loose material, so colored sand, gold, and these crystals, and over 3, 4, 5 months they build. And at the end, we have a sculpture that I haven't touched, that I haven't planned, that is each time different. In a way, my works are kind of traps because they can be visually very appealing, very colorful. And so on the surface, maybe they could attract viewers who are interested in just their visual properties, but actually each of these works is an embodiment of various kind of very political problems of late digital capitalism. For example, the termite mounds are expressions of this exploitation of our labor performed by corporations such as Meta and Google and Amazon. I started thinking about where did the virtualization of capital begin? Was it related to digital capitalism, to digital culture, or was it something that started much earlier? And I realized that actually this virtualization and dematerialization of both money and labor started at the beginning of human civilization. And so this brought me to explore history of currencies, but only currencies as objects, informal objects that circulate in shadow economies since the beginning of humanity, starting with beads and shells, till today, when we have various kinds of crises and wars and migrations. People circulate various objects despite the existence of coins and banknotes. Currently, over 90% of money in the world's circulation is invisible. I started collecting all the objects, from historical objects to contemporary objects, and one of the objects that inspired this work was Tide detergent. So it's a washing powder that was used quite broadly in the United States by petty criminals who buy drugs using boxes of Tide. And through my investigation of this subject, I realized that a lot of small communities or closed communities, like prisons, schools, kindergartens, or convents in the past, people were circulating different kind of forms of exchange, such as cigarettes, for example. Historically, there are so many interesting objects that people used as a currency. For example, whale teeth that were used in Fiji until the end of the British Mandate. You could actually buy an entire building paying with a whale tooth. Human skulls that were used in Borneo until the 18th century, and many other interesting objects that were circulated and are again being circulated today during various kinds of crises around the world. Currency converter was my immediate response to the emergence of Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, in 2016. The End of Signature is a series of works where I was trying to embody the ineffable value of social capital, something that is very difficult to capture, but something that today in digital capitalism is being captured by corporations and even governments because of the constant surveillance of our digital footprints. So actually today it's possible to quantify and monetize the value of people power, the value of social capital. And governments and corporations do it. And so I wanted to make a work that also talks about not only this capture of social capital, but also how various communities and groups of people form collective personalities, how we can think about anything in the world as a product of collective intelligence, and how what is most important is for the creation of anything on the planet is this collective plural subjectivity and polyphony of agencies, both human and non-human. I started collecting signatures of thousands of people from various communities, and I worked with computer engineers to use artificial intelligence to fuse these signatures together into one collective signature. These signatures are also an example of how a certain medium, a certain technology is becoming out of date, because our handwriting, which seemed to be something very typical for human civilization, is completely evaporating as we are starting to tap on our digital devices. We are no longer using our handwritten signatures. Very soon we're gonna use probably iris scans or DNA samples or fingerprints to identify ourselves in institutions. The title, The End of Signature, is referring to both the end of handwriting, but also the end of signature of an individual author. Because I'm thinking that culture in the future, just like Wikipedia, may be produced by multitude of individuals, multitude of maybe not only human but also more than human agents. And forms of culture may be more complex and collective. I was very inspired by a number of philosophers, for example, Hui, who talks about how digital objects today are a very particular kind of objects because they are created at some point maybe by a designer, but they are updated constantly, not only by their designers, but also by the crowds of their users. After the automobile production and car factories were moved to Asia, mostly China, but now also other places, all the factories in Detroit and other cities where original Ford factories were established, they were closed. Over 100 years of car production, when cars were being spray painted on production lines, there were particles of paint that were floating in the air. And these particles were falling on the ground and on the rails and over time accumulating, and they formed something like a quasi-mineral, a quasi-geological formation that was extremely colorful and very hard. The workers discovered that they can cut it, and then it reveals all the layers of colorful paint that was fashionable over 100 years. Yellow or red cars in the 50s and 60s, or metallic colors in the 80s. So it became like a geology of taste, and of course a geology of labor of all these workers. And I was interested in how, today this economy has changed. And today we are all workers, and most of the labor is happening without our knowledge. And it's a very important change in economy where basically the entire society became a factory. Various molecules of metals, which are present in our computers and server farms, the same metals were at the bottom of the ocean just before life emerged. They probably contributed to the emergence of life, but today, as we are extracting these metals to use them in computers, we are destroying ecosystems. So this kind of perpetual circle of different materials and elements falling apart and forming new elements and forms brought me to make chemical gardens, which are these cubes with different molecules of these metals that are mixed together in a solution of sodium silicate. And I create a system. I just mix these chemicals together, and each time different new forms that look like plants grow out of this mix. In an uncontrolled way, I am creating this kind of quasi-life forms that are completely inorganic. My parents were electrical engineers, but my father was always inventing things and patenting stuff, and at some point he invented a system of cable markers, so how to mark cables, many cables in the machine, and how to tell them apart. Over the years I realized how big of an influence actually it was on my own work, because it's this idea of like a system that organizes and represents knowledge. I got interested in science very early on, and so I always weaved in my interest in philosophy with science. I didn't really know how this could be eventually concretized, but I wasn't interested in making art because I had a very humble upbringing. I didn't have an idea of becoming an artist. I was thinking more about working with other people and complex agencies and many elements, and whether people, animals, systems. And so at some point somebody advised to me that there is this relatively new realm called curating, and I got a fellowship to study curating after my philosophy studies. I was working on an exhibition inside of a movie, or an exhibition inside of a song, or inside of a computer virus, an exhibition that would happen underwater. And so they were actually all artworks in the form of exhibitions and involving other people's work. This was the beginning, and then slowly I started making works, but thinking about systems, about more creating a system than shaping a form has always been very important for my practice. Conversions is theoretically a painting. It's made on copper, but it's made with paint, but it includes particles of liquid crystals used in our screens, computer screens, our phones. These particles change shape, and through electrical charge or temperature change, the paintings constantly change their forms and colors. I'm using artificial intelligence to capture conversations that people are having online, how they are expressing their feelings around changing the world. And these emotions are physically impacting changes inside of the painting that perpetually evolves. Late capitalism is treating the future as a piece of real estate for sale. The speculations about the future can be capitalized on and monetized. Semiotic life is a 75-year-old bonsai tree, a living tree. I worked with artificial intelligence algorithms, collaborating with computer scientists to predict how this species of bonsai, so a juniper bonsai tree, how it's going to evolve in the future. And we created this prediction visually, and then we produced it as a three-dimensional form, and then we entangled this form with a living 75-year-old tree. So now this living tree is growing around this prediction, and in a way this prediction is limiting and shaping the way that the actual life grows. The predictions of the future, even if they may be wrong, they are actually impacting our present. The future is, in a way, happening today. It's embedded in our everyday life.